Is it okay for the church to get involved in the public arena? Should Christians be actively involved in the free elections of the United States of America? Faith Wins is an organization dedicated to engaging pastors, congregations, and Christians in the public arena. Why, you may ask? Because the influence of Christians needs to be felt around this country. Jesus is the solution, and we need to bring biblical solutions to the marketplace of ideas before it's too late, and we need to do it now. There are over 80 million eligible Christian voters in this country, but only 30 million regularly participate in the elections. This needs to change, and Chad Connelly is going to tell you why in just a minute. Check us out online at faithwins.us. That's faithwins.us. When we sit on the sidelines and hope for a better future, the enemy wins. When we mobilize, register, and make our voices heard, faith wins every time. For far too many decades, the church has stood by the side as politics has been taken over by the enemy. In the name of avoiding all things worldly, we've allowed ourselves to be ruled politically by those who ignore the godly biblical foundation of our great country. It's time that Christ followers get politically active and bring the kingdom down to earth, especially in all 570,000 plus elected offices in this country. It's time for you to get involved. Faith Wins is dedicated to engaging pastors, congregations, and Christians in the public arena. Why? Because the influence of Christians needs to be felt around the country. We are good for this country. There are 80 million eligible voters in the Christian community, but only 30 million participate on a regular basis. In 2024, this needs to change by the millions, by the tens of millions. And Chad Connelly is going to tell you why in just a minute. I'm Jim Brangenberg. Check us out online at faithwins.org. Faithwins.org. Chad Connelly, welcome back to the Faith Wins podcast.
Hey, my brother. What's up, man? Appreciate you a lot.
So I want to talk a little bit about some of the attacks on you and some of the things that are attacks on generally on the Christian population in this country. What is Christian nationalism?
You know, as soon as you get that question, you realize they don't know what to ask you. And so the media has gotten really lazy, and they'll pick up these terms they think are pejorative or negative, or they'll put you into a box. So I always ask them, what do you mean by Christian nationalism? And after they stumble around a little bit, you realize that what they're trying to say is you Christians want to dominate. You want to force everybody into a theocracy. And you know what's funny about it is they're so pitifully misinformed about history, they don't even realize God's role in the nation. And nobody I know in the Christian space is ever tried to force anybody into a theocracy. You must be a Christian. We're the place where religious freedom reigns, and you got the right to be wrong here. You got the right to believe what you want to believe. What's happened in our country is exactly the opposite, actually. And they'll call you every bad name. It reminds me a lot of, you know, being in debates as a state party chairman, and they'll start calling you homophobic or racist. That's another big one. And so Christian nationalism has kind of taken the place. And I remember debating a very liberal, militant homosexual one time, and they started calling me all those names. And I just kind of looked at them until they ran out of breath. And I said, gosh, that's all you got? That's all you have? I knew I'd beat you in the debate, but I didn't know you'd give up that quick. You don't have anything you believe in enough to stand on that you wouldn't start calling names that quickly? And of course, he melted down. It was fun to watch and enjoy. It's just another one of the attack words that the left uses to try to make us keep our heads down. It's really meaningless. They don't even know what it means themselves, but it's used that way to make Christians go, ooh, I don't want to be that. And I'll tell you, it works on some people, Jim. It really does work on some people. I've been the target of some pretty interesting hits. And when you start asking them questions, they don't really have any answers.
But you never really answer the question, though. Christian nationalism, is there really a definition for it, or is it a made-up deal?
That's what it means, is they think that they really believe if you're out teaching, and I think I did answer the question, actually. Okay. They really think that we want to force people to be Christians. Okay. That's what they want. They think that we can scare people into thinking you want a theocracy. I don't think I said that. And
okay. So you did. Okay. I just want to make sure we defined it for people.
Yeah. Because that's what I take. But, you know, when I ask them to define it for me, they can't do it. But they do think you want to be coercive. And it's always funny listening to people who want to coerce us, whether it's we're going to coerce you to take a vaccine or wear a mask, or we're going to coerce you to let the border be wide open. We're going to coerce. It's funny coming from people like that, that's their attempt to make you put your head down.
Oh, the enemy's got the same program. They're always accusing everybody else of exactly what they're doing. So then what's dominionism?
Yeah, dominionism. David Barton actually had to address this. My buddy, the Christian historian, had to address this because they just kept on saying it. So the people who say dominionism, there was a Christian historian years ago who used it, and I guess they take it from that. I had to go back and look it up the first time I heard somebody attack us with that. It was a media person. The dominionists, they believe that if we just push this further, faster, Jesus will come back sooner and we'll bring the promise, the time of the revelation in if we just push this envelope. That's what they believe. I don't know anybody in my Christian space who believes we ought to be a theocracy or who believes we can speed up God's timetable. No, nobody. But yet those are those little hook words that the media uses.
I mean, Revelation is pretty clear that even after the 1,000-year reign, there's still going to be people that aren't following Jesus. So
nobody knows the day or the hour, and there's nothing you can do about it. Jesus is clear about that stuff throughout Scripture. But again, you got to remember who the media is by and large. So, and I'll tell the story. David Barton and I were featured in an article. When you wake up on a Thursday morning and Politico spends 42 pages and 6,000 words trashing your reputation, it's interesting. I got text messages, emails, phone calls from all over the country, people who saw it, because then it appeared in Drudge Report and they called us bogus historians. And the story of that was there's a guy named Tim Alberta, nice guy. I really like Tim. He came to a couple meetings I had, and I invited him to stay and hear David. He never would hear our whole talk, but he wanted to interview me. And we were in Dayton, Ohio. It was like a Monday or Tuesday night, Jim. And at the time when he interviewed me, I said, you really ought to hear Barton's talk, because I knew he was going to hit David. And he did. He like I said, a lot of the media is lazy, and I think he probably falls in that category. It's a lot easier to Google something said about somebody years ago instead of investigating and spending the time and effort yourself. And I think part of the media's laziness is they just have a narrative. They're going to push a narrative. They want to tell a story and whatever fits. So we're in Dayton, Ohio. I think it's a Monday night. Pastor Pat Murray's church. At the time, I thought we had between 600 and 700 people there. His lead usher said it was over 700 people there that night. Now, remember, this is a weeknight. We got David Barton speaking. Of course, I spoke 15 or 20 minutes. David does 40 or 45. And this guy interviews me almost the entire time. He wouldn't sit in David's talk. I even offered to fly him to David's museum to see the rich history that he's collected over 40 years about founders' quotes and diaries and Bibles that talk about God's role in the founding and throughout American history, how important God's role is. We don't have an American republic without God, bottom line. Well, he wouldn't do that. And so we're out there. And of course, he hits the whole Christian nationalism thing and all these other accusations. And this guy walks through with a MAGA hat on. And he's like, see, doesn't that bother you? You're feeding that narrative. And I'm like, Tim, there are 600 or 700 people in an auditorium in a church on a Monday or Tuesday night. You find one guy with a MAGA hat and you've got your narrative. I said, I saw a Green Bay Packers hat a little bit ago. Here we are in Ohio. Isn't that blasphemy? And it turns out it was a pretty good pivot. He didn't use it, but it turns out that, and we hit it off. I like him. I text with him. He texted me not long later and said, hey, I want to give you a polite heads up. I hit you and Barton pretty hard in my new book. And I was like, man, my people don't read your stuff. I don't care. But, it turns out a Trump person attacked him over a book he wrote about Trump several years ago. It was turned into a Netflix movie, very angry kind of thing. But it was at his dad's funeral. His dad was a pastor. Tim's a believer. He'd be a social justice warrior. I think he's got some bitterness that kind of came out. I think he's kind of troubled. And then some guys picked up on what he said and hit us even more. It was dishonest. It was out of context and all that stuff. And all that's really sad. But my favorite lines, I didn't read the 6,000 words. Obviously, I do my best not to read negative, but he had two quotes that pastor sent me. He said, "I'm a likable, husky Southern gentleman, Jim." So that was good. And the other quote was that I rolled off my scriptural verses almost as easily as my redneck one-liners. Those are my two favorite quotes I heard.
Those are fantastic quotes.
Yeah, that's great. And so, I like Tim. I think I asked him, I said, "Tim, have you already got your story written? You just want me to give you a quote? Tell me what you're looking for." But I said, "Let me ask you something. Have you spent a fraction of the time going at the churches that fell over themselves to march for the Marxist group, Black Lives Matter, or the ones that they won't go march for saving babies? They won't tell about God's role in American history, but they'll go out and do the social justice warrior stuff, thinking they're doing good works." And of course, so that's not the topic of my book. But it was funny, Jim. I was in church the Sunday after the Politico article hit, and I'm thinking nobody in my space reads this, right? There's a guy in our singing choir or whatever, and he meets me. I leave our sanctuary. I walk back to teach my Sunday school class, and Dickie says, "Hey, man, I'm praying for you." "Thanks, man." And I know Dickie. I don't know him super well, but hey, I appreciate you praying for me. I said, "What are you praying for me for?" And he said, "I read Politico." "What, you read Politico?" So, but it's one of those instructive things. I got a thick skin. I've been around this a while. And above all, I realize what they're doing. They're trying to discourage us. And like I said, I think it's a real disparity. In fact, it's hypocritical for him to attack us as bogus historians for teaching the truth. And I said, "Hey, I'll fly you to Barton's museum. I'm not taking somebody around who's a charlatan. He spent his career collecting these documents about real founders' quotes, original source material, not what somebody said or heard that was repeated by 13 other or 14 other people." And he wouldn't take me up on that. And that's disappointing. But I'll tell you, it's instructive about the media, and I think Christians need to be aware of it.
But why? Why does the media hate Christians? Why do they hate anything biblical? Because anybody that takes time to really understand, I understand there's religious people out there, and they kind of put religious people and Christians in the same world, but as believers, everything about us should be changing. Everybody around us should be benefiting from our faith, whether they believe in Jesus or not. That's the kingdom. Why does the media hate us so much?
I don't know about Tim. Tim's a believer. I believe he loves the Lord. I believe he loves Jesus, and he's going to heaven. His dad was a pastor. No question. That's been a great impact. I do think he's got some anger and bitterness and the guy was wrong. The guy shouldn't have gone up to him at his dad's funeral and attacked him about an article he wrote. But Tim has worked for some pretty lefty news groups that you and I wouldn't work for. We wouldn't work for. And I wouldn't be associated with some of those groups that, people choose to write. So even if you've got the right heart, but you're the social justice, I think it kind of comes into a works religion thing, right? They believe they're doing good works.
But there's far beyond, Tim. I'm talking about, there's 100,000 quote unquote journalists out there. It's like they're on a warpath to just destroy anything biblical, anything moral.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm reading the book right now, Karl Marx, The Devil and Karl Marx. And I think a lot of it goes back to the core. They're atheists. They're godless. They don't know the Lord. They don't have any foundational aspect to their lives. And when people don't have a greater source above, they look to self, right? And I don't know if you ever read Francis Schaeffer. I just finished reading his The Christian Manifesto again, written in like 1971. He said the greatest threat to the next generation of Christianity is statism. And his whole point was, and I do this in my Sunday school class all the time, I draw an H, and I say, "I know it looks like an H. That's a throne." And it's my bad drawing, but it's a throne. The only person who belongs on the throne of your life is God. And for an atheist that doesn't have a mooring and a compass of there's a God, there's a higher being that I have to answer to, they put themselves on the throne, self goes in. Well, and I tell people, the way I communicate that is, look, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. I know I don't have the answers. I had all the answers at 20, and then I didn't realize I didn't know the questions, and people start giving me new questions, and wisdom comes in over life, hopefully, right? you realize I got to look to God. I don't have the answers, and people I'm around don't have the answers. They're fallible. But if you don't believe there's a God, and you believe that, hey, whatever I feel like, that's best, and we live in a world of feelings, Jim, big time. Let's honor feelings. After a while, when you realize you don't have the answers, you look to somebody to solve your problems. They don't believe in a responsibility, a final accountability to God, a judgment day. Those things don't matter. They look to the state. You must solve my problems because it can't be my fault. And what does Jesus teach us? What does the Bible teach us? We're responsible. You know, a great church, a great sermon, a great pastor doesn't get us to heaven. It's an individual choice to say, I am a sinner, Lord. Please forgive me. Thank you for dying on the cross and taking away my sins. That's an individual choice. Nobody can do it for you. And so when people come from a background that doesn't have that, there's a God, there's a higher being, they see themselves as having all the answers. Francis Schaeffer explained, and this is a big time paraphrase, and there are people who can do it much more eloquently. They start looking to the state and they put the state on the throne. And of course, we have a lot of people now, Jim, Christians, the left wing of Christianity, it's all works. It's a bunch of works. I got to do all this good stuff to get to heaven. And Jesus, that Paul reminded us in Ephesians, not about works, lest you boast. Nothing gets you there. It's the free gift of salvation, lest you boast. And so when they come from that background, they want to solve problems too. They look to not the individual, not the responsibility, but the blame and the let's get government to fix it. I really think that's the big divide. And I think most of the media fall on that left of center side where they think government has the answers.
Well, I think what you just gave us was a phenomenal perspective on why we should love on those media people and why we should be praying for those media people and the people that don't have God at the center of their lives. And we should have empathy for them and we should be praying for them because that's the only way we're ever going to be able to overcome the lying and biased media is to be praying for these people and teach them the truth. What a great perspective. Chad, the church in America.
I've probably done 25 interviews in the past month wearing the former chairman hat, and I work hard to build a relationship. Hey, let's grab coffee. Let's talk. I have fun with them. I build a relationship. I want to have that ability to communicate and talk back and forth. And I do want to find out what makes them tick. And most of them just don't have a real solid faith background. It's very casual, if anything at all.
Well, they probably have a lot of church hurt or they got been a lot of Christian hurt. And so they need to be hear the truth. All right, listen, we got to close up, but we got a couple of great questions I still want you to be able to answer. The church in America has boldly stayed out of politics, even treating abortion like a political stance. What's going on? Did God call us to step out and separate ourselves from the world like this? Or did God tell us to get involved and help bring solutions to the world?
You know, I get this question occasionally from Christians and pastors, and I'll say, yeah, that's right. In the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, Jesus says, go be salt and light, comma, except for politics. And of course, he'll go, well, no, he didn't say that. There's no comma there. There's no hyphen. There's no but. We're to be salt and light in every arena. And when they say, well, I don't want to do the political, I don't believe that life is a political issue. I don't believe biblical marriage or religious freedom or Israel. There's a big one. Or a secure national sovereignty like a border. Those aren't political issues. They've been politicized, but they're spiritual issues that I can go back and put you right in touch with the scripture that ties into it. And so they're biblical, spiritual issues that have been politicized. But just because the media or people who are on the left of that have politicized it, it doesn't remove my responsibility to tell the truth. I have a burden to my children, my wife, my Sunday school class, the people in my sphere of influence. I have a burden to meet that obligation, if you will, that I'm to be salt and light in every area, every aspect. It's not political. That attack of, oh, you're being political. It's so funny. Those people wouldn't go march for babies, but they'll go march for Black Lives Matter, who now we know is about destruction of the family. They're about a Marxist organization that raised money not to go help Black people or poor people. It was to enrich a bevy of elites. And it's the same old story of godless communism and socialism from time immemorial and back to before Karl Marx. Is that little group of people always thinks they're better. And so we as Christians have an obligation to be involved in everything. And if I have that conversation with pastors, I can win them over. I might have told the story, Wisconsin, I had a pastor. I'm just skeptical. What are you skeptical about, Pastor? Well, the whole political thing. And I said, Pastor, do you think I want you to be political? He said, yeah, I guess so. And I said, no, I just want you to be biblical. He said, what do you mean? And I said, sit in my talk and David Barton's talk. And he did. He said he couldn't, but he did. When I was done, he came up and grabbed me by the arm and he said, Chad, I want to be ground zero for everything you do in our state. And I can tell you that story in every single state I've been in, every single state. I'm encouraged because I see God's people starting to rise up and say, I've had it. It's enough. And I'm telling you, I'm seeing it from pastors of every stripe, denomination, background, ethnicity, region of the country, whatever you want to delineate. Those folks are coming out saying, it's time for me to get involved.
When you look at, we're at the beginning of 2024. There's several months left before the election. How should believers be getting involved in the process today?
Yeah. The first thing I'd tell them is check their biblical worldview. Check your biblical worldview. George Barna's research, they ought to read a book called U-Turn that Barna and David Barton wrote, and they ought to find out where their worldview is. There's a group called Nehemiah Institute that does a worldview study. Am I really seeing things through the media lens or my own lens or my friends and family lens, or am I seeing it through a God lens? That's the first thing. Because when you have a biblical worldview and you say, oh boy, I'm responsible. God expects me to step up and to do my part. Occupy till he comes in the book of Luke. We're to occupy till he comes. We've not done a very good job. No man having put his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of God. Luke 9:62, I think. And so we're to engage. We're to put our hands on the plow and go do our part. So check our biblical worldview first. Second thing is, look, maybe your role, I told this to a media person in some state, New Hampshire. Maybe you're supposed to get involved in the community and coach your kids' Little League class. I got involved. I went to my son's Webelos, which is between Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts. And I didn't have time for it. And this was 10, 12 years ago. And I get there and two of the dads have on Budweiser hats and they were going to be the leaders. I'm like, nope, that ain't happening. I'm not putting my kid under it. I'm here. I'm going to do it. And maybe that's what you're called to do. But everybody should be voting biblical values. Everybody should be registered. Everybody should be talking about issues that impact the church and their lives. And let's face it, the media always likes to say, well, you just care about life and marriage. No. All these drugs coming across the border, it's impacting the churches. Human trafficking, impacting the churches. Inflation, higher costs, impacting the churches. Everybody, every stripe, don't have to be independent, Republican, Democrat, green, polka dot, black, white, brown, yellow. It doesn't matter what color they are. It impacts everybody. These issues matter. I just did a tour of the state capitol for some Christian school kids. And, how many of y'all are into politics? No, I hate it, whatever. How many of y'all have a job? About 2/3 of the high school seniors had jobs. I said, you're in politics whether you like it or not. You're already involved. Now the responsibility is yours to get informed and figure out how to engage. So my role, what we have found our niche, and I think it's unique. A media person asked me, who else is doing this way? I don't know. But I know that we work through pastors who introduce us to other pastors. When pastors get together and encourage one another, we can take small meetings to become big meetings that create small meetings and then rinse and repeat. And I believe when we get God's people involved, we'll get our country back on track.
That line that you just, first of all, the rinse and repeat, I always take offense at that because that references the hair thing. But you just said you're already involved. Now get informed.
Yes.
That's a powerful line because we are all involved. We are all citizens of the United States of America. We are involved. These issues are impacting us. So many issues we didn't get a chance to talk about today. So get informed. Do you have one website or that you'd love to tell people to go to get informed that they can count on for truth?
Yeah, I love wall builder stuff. I mean, David has amassed an incredible, just a plethora of background, of truth, of factual, historical, first source documents. He spent 40 years doing that. So go to wallbuilders.com and read what the founders had to say. I could tell story after story after story just what an impact his stuff has had on me. I read his books. I've read everything the guy's written. I listen to him. He has devoted his life into finding out the truth. And let's face it, the kids aren't getting it. A lot of the churches don't know it. The pastors, some of them are scared of it. They're hiding behind the pulpit, which is really a shame, but it's happening. So I find my role is to just put them with other pastors. They start feeling a little bit of comfort in that community, and they figure, hey, I can do this. I can get my people to do voter registration. I can get my people to recruit for poll watching. I can go out and I'll ask them the question. I'll bet 5 pastors that should have heard this talk today. Who are they?
I love that. You're already involved. Get informed. Chad Connelly with Faith Wins. Thanks so much for being here today. Great conversation.
Appreciate you, man. Can't wait to get back.
And thanks for listening to the Faith Wins podcast with Faith Wins founder, Chad Connelly. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg, and I want to ask you to check out Faith Wins online at faithwins.org. That's faithwins.org. Your vote is needed and necessary as we all learn to engage in our system of free elections around the United States of America. And if you're not registered, stop what you're doing right now. If you're not registered to vote, please take time to do so on your local county voter registration website. In the upcoming election, vote for candidates supporting biblical values and a biblical worldview. And if you don't know what those are, go to wallbuilders.com and find out what a biblical worldview is all about. And until next time, remember, when we sit on the sidelines and hope for a better future, the enemy wins. When we mobilize, register, and make our voices heard, faith wins every time.
Go to faithwins.org.
My name is Chad Connelly. When I founded Faith Wins, it was to spread the truth that God's role in America is irreplaceable. Faith wins when people of faith vote their values. Our mission is laser focused on educating, activating, and mobilizing faith leaders, providing them with the tools, the resources, and the messaging to leverage their impact in the political and the governmental arenas. We cultivate, develop relationships with pastors who share the whole counsel of God, who stand for truth.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Faith Wins podcast with Faith Wins founder, Chad Connelly. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg, and I want to ask you to check out Faith Wins online at faithwins.us. That's faithwins.us. Your vote is needed and necessary, and we all need to learn to engage in our system of free elections right here in the United States of America. If you're not registered to vote, please take time to do so on your local county voter registration website and do it today. In an upcoming election, vote for candidates supporting biblical values and a biblical worldview. Until next time, remember, when Christians engage in the public arena, faith wins.